So Grace Jabbari has taken the stand in the Jonathan Majors trial. She took the stand immediately this morning. She is the second witness so far. Yesterday, we heard opening statements and we heard from one witness. He was the DA's digital evidence analyst, and he didn't testify for very long, even though there was supposed to be 2 terabytes of data that the prosecution had in this case. These text messages and all this video surveillance footage that was supposed to be relevant. We really didn't hear from this guy for too long. And none of the news outlets really touched on that. They all seem to have focused on the opening statements, even though opening statements aren't supposed to be used as evidence. They're storytelling, they're narratives, they make great headlines. Those are my best guesses as to why we are not hearing much coverage about this digital evidence analyst testimony yesterday, but let me know what you think. And to set the stage, people started entering the courtroom around 10:15 this morning. Jonathan Majors came in holding a binder and a Bible, which he was stemming through. Everyone reported on this, that he was sitting there reading through different verses, following along with his finger, all the way up until the judge started speaking. And then when the judge started speaking, it was announced immediately that Grace Jabbari was going to be taking the stand. ADA Kelli Galaway is going to be doing the questioning on direct for Grace Jabbari. According to reporters and some of the news articles that I've read, Jabbari seemed very cheery, was giggling at times, was crying at other times through her testimony. We're going to see that she took a break during one part, and she also kept apologizing to the judge when she would start choking up. Danny Law noted that she giggled and said that she was just a bit nervous. So Grace first greets the jury. She says, "I am Grace Jabbari. Nice to meet you. I'm a professional dancer." Now, this article bounces around through the actual order of the testimony, and we're going to try to paint the picture of how testimony went in order today. So first, we're going to jump to background information. Galloway asked Jabbari what the ages of her 3 siblings were, and Jabbari giggled back, "Is this a test?" And so Jabbari starts discussing, she mentions her family a little bit, she talks about her career as a dancer, and then it gets into more narrow background context where she'll eventually meet Jonathan Majors. So Jabbari was a movement director on the set of Ant-Man. This was in Pinewood, United Kingdom, and that's important because she's going to be staying at where Jonathan Majors is staying during this early part of their relationship. She describes this is how they met. Quote, "In one of the breaks, he came over to me, nearest the monitor, and asked me what I was doing, why I was here, and I said, 'Oh, I'm a dancer. I'm working on movement.' She said his hairstylist slipped her his number, and the two went on a date. The relationship progressed fast," she said. Now, pause there because I feel like I heard something yesterday about opening statements that Michael Perez said that Jonathan Majors called her after meeting her on the set. But here we have her testifying that she was slipped his number, which means she would call him, right? But did anyone else hear that? Let me move on. She describes it very fast and very early on. "We spent every day together, maybe minus a few, within the next few months. He told me he loved me very early on." She said that Majors would quote her poetry, and "I felt very loved and cared for." Now, that reminds me of yesterday during opening statements where when Michael Perez couldn't, use the word victim to describe Jabbari, but he said that she was trained and withheld affection. But now we hear her saying, I felt, past tense, very loved and cared for. So presumably part of this pattern of abuse will be the decline in feeling cared for. And now we're going to get into the pattern of abuse. So we had background information, then we get into pattern of abuse. And ABC describes this early period of incidents occurring as Jonathan Majors being mean or aggressive. If we hop over to People magazine with some reporting from Emily Palmer, we see the same sentiment. So here she said, she, Jabbari, discussed them many times. She said she had been scared of setting off the man who she described as falling into easy, quote, rage and aggression. Quote, "His face kind of changes when he gets into that place," Jabbari told the jury. "He's a big guy, so you just want to step back." Pin that because if you say something like that, now you can be cross-examined on that. If I was a defense attorney, and I have no doubt that Priya Chaudhry would note this, and if it's her doing the cross-examination, maybe it won't be. "He's a big guy, so you just want to step back. But what do we see you doing in this video surveillance footage where he is walking by, noticing you and looking away and continuing to walk away? He's a big guy, so you just want to step back." And in fact, we even see another witness in that same video, that surveillance footage, and you can hear her talk about it in the audio too, Chloe, the girl Chloe. She whacks her boyfriend, the guy in the hat, the white guy in the hat, because he's trying to go fight Jonathan Majors. And she obviously realizes that's not a smart idea, probably because he is a big guy and it's stupid reason to fight, but also he's a big guy. So stupid game, stupid prizes, right? He's a big guy, so you just want to step back. Yeah, that's agreeable. That's something that seems like common sense to say. Maybe the jury nods their head in agreement. But then if the defense gets on and cross-examines you and says, if you felt like that and you have all this reason to believe that he's dangerous, why didn't you step back? Why did you chase? We heard all this story about how he chased you, and you'll see we have one picture provided, we have an audio recording provided. But all these other times, all these other patterns, what we can see here as it relates to March 25th, you're doing the chasing, you're doing the messaging, you're doing the threats of suicide. So as we go through this, little details like that, pin them and think about how that might go on cross-examination. But that was a tangent. Let me move on. So let's get into incident one. Jonathan Majors has two dogs, Captain and Hero. They look small in this picture. And even though he looks like he's been training in this picture, the dog looks a little bit bigger. It looks like a shepherd mix of some kind, but I'm not a dog breed expert. So they meet in September 2021, and now Grace is coming to meet the dogs and probably learn to be around them. And this is December 2021. So this is not that long after they meet and started hanging out every day. But logic tells me that she was not going to his place and hanging out where the dogs were present. So maybe he didn't bring the dogs out, maybe he didn't get them yet, or maybe in that 3 months where they spent all this time together, he was still very private and did not invite her to come to the house. Now, I don't have dogs, but I've had dogs before. I've also had roommates that had dogs that were very well trained and other dogs would come over, and there's always a process. Your dogs need to meet people, your dogs need to meet other dogs. People should be informed about how to act around the dogs because it's just safety. It's proper training for the dog. But here we see this described as an instance where Majors is being controlling and aggressive and angry. She said Majors gave her specific instructions on how to behave around the dogs. At that point, Jabbari mentioned how an ex-boyfriend had a dog, and she said he became angry and raised his voice. "How dare I mention him," she quoted him telling her. "It's embarrassing to him that I dated him. His dog is pathetic," this kind of stuff. "It was the first time I felt scared of him." Now let's look at incident 2. This fast forwards to June 2022. So she feels scared of him. She said the relationship changed very fast, and she gives this one incident from December 2022, or from December 2021. And then we jump all the way to June 2022 for the next aggressive or mean incident. This happens in Glastonbury. I think she went to a music festival or some type of concert, and she didn't have great phone reception, or she wasn't answering her phone, or that type of thing can be interpreted two ways. And she describes that Jonathan Majors was not very nice about it, the phone reception. Quote, "Just that I shouldn't be there and how dare I go," she said. "You're just out there drinking with your friends, and I had a really hard week." And then she describes that Majors had been quite stressed because he was training for a movie. Now, I'm noting this. You're just out there drinking with your friends. Now, according to her, they spent all this time together every single day. Now he's been training for a movie. Maybe they're not seeing each other as much. And now she's out at a film festival with friends, with a group of people. She's not answering her phone. You know, reception can be bad in random places. And some people do get jealous or upset if you don't answer your phone. And that's not always okay. It's okay to be concerned, but it's probably not okay that if this part is true, you shouldn't be there. You shouldn't go out. How dare you? Like, that's a bit extreme. But again, this is her characterization of this. This is her words. We're going to see that in September, she moves in with him at his London residence. It's all over back and forth, but remember, they do travel for work. But let's look at this July 2022 detail where here here ABC says the first thing that he threw was the candle. She showed the jury a photo of the room. So this jury has been admitted into evidence. It's an exhibit. There's a dent on the wall. The dent on the wall is one of the candles, she says. She used a pen to mark the spot where she was standing. Quote, "I took the photo because the shift in his temper was something that I was aware of. I just wanted to remember it. I know I kept forgiving him, but I wanted to have a bit of memory of it." Jabbari often testified through nervous laughter, occasionally finishing her responses with a giggle. And then with the Daily Beast, we have a little bit more detail here. So the first thing he threw was a candle. And then after the argument, she said Majors began to cry and express, quote, "self-hatred, saying he was a monster before thanking her for her patience. The Messenger also reported on this monster line where Jabbari is telling us that Jonathan Majors told her, "I'm a monster, I'm sorry. Every time that temper came, I was trying to learn the triggers. Trying to not let it get to that point was my responsibility." So now we're going to get into the September 2022 incident. That's the headphone incident. And we don't have the context here, but from ABC, we do get the context that by September 2022, Jabbari was living with Majors in London where he was shooting a movie. She recounted a Sunday when she had been at a pub with friends and returned to the house with them. Now, if you look everywhere else and if you look at the story from yesterday, it was one female friend that came back. I don't know how much of a difference it would make if she returned home with one friend, one female friend, or if she returned home with a group of friends after going out to the pub, but you never know. Those details could be important. And we have ABC making it seem like it was a group of friends that came back to the house, and then other outlets, and then the opening statements yesterday specified that it was a female friend. But she describes that because of bringing home this friend or possible friends to the house, that he was getting a bit snappy, just quick with his responses, she said. Jabbari says that she ushered everyone out of the house. So there's that everyone language again, more than one person. The following day, she said they met at a park when he accused her of being an alcoholic. So there's that mention of alcohol again. Tore headphones off her head and shouting at her. Now, this mention is at a park. They meet at a park. So it seems like she left that night at some point and they had to communicate to meet back up. And then they meet up at this park, even though yesterday it seemed like they were arguing maybe in the place of residence right after the friends had gotten kicked out. And she tried to run away, like maybe run to the door, and her headphones was yanked out while she was running. But here it seems like they're sitting at a park talking, and she has headphones on or in, and he yanks them off. Which might just be a sort of, hey, would you listen to me? And maybe you shouldn't touch someone's stuff, but she touched his phone, right? That's how we're here. To me, that's a little bit different than if someone's trying to run away and you're trying to grab at them and you happen to grab a cord and snatch it off them because you're trying to stop them from running. So the description of this in the opening statement, it seems like Perez didn't know the details, maybe. I don't know. They say that after this thing that happened at the park, he's shouting at her. Better not be in the house when I get home, Majors said that day to Jabbari. Jabbari broke down in tears on the stand after recounting the story and asked the judge for a break. Upon resuming her testimony, Jabbari said she left the park and returned to the home she was sharing with Majors and started to pack, but, quote, froze when she heard Majors coming. Quote, he proceeded to grab everything and was just throwing it, swiping it, moving it, and throwing it. Anything I had bought him, he was breaking, Jabbari said. I just said, you can stop. I'm leaving. Just please stop. She said it left her scared, upset, and confused, and that he was blaming her because she, quote, disturbed the peace or something like that. Then this article goes right to the jury heard a recording Jabbari made with her iPhone of Majors shouting at her, demanding she behave Coretta Scott King or Michelle Obama. I'm a great man. I do great things for my culture and for the world. The woman that supports me needs to be a great woman, Majors is heard on the recording saying. 2 nights ago, you did not do that, which took away from the plan. Jabbari said she understood that to mean that he had to come first. Through halting sobs, Jabbari described what happened after he stopped shouting. I just kept saying I'm sorry, and I took all the blame. I just took the full blame to calm him down. She said she promised she would not tell anyone what happened and was left quite scared of him and yet dependent on him. On the Daily Beast, we have Jabbari describes the September 2022 argument during which Majors allegedly yanked her headphones out of her ears and screamed in her face. She asked to leave the courtroom to take the break, but when she comes back, she takes a deep breath and describes how Majors once threw her out of the house before asking her to return and telling her he wanted to marry her. Majors is heard yelling in the recording, "That is real." As the court heard the recording, Majors looked straight ahead and listened while his girlfriend sat in the row behind him and nodded. Jabbari said that their increasingly heated arguments made her feel isolated from her friends and family and dependent on Majors. She stayed in the relationship, however, because she loved him and was worried about his well-being after he threatened suicide at least once. And I want to hone in on this before we move away from this incident, right? Because we heard all this buzz about Coretta Scott King and the demands. You might have heard me mention yesterday in a chat room that it reminds me of how the Sarah Brady and Jonah Hill thing was pitched as demands and forcing someone to change and forcing someone to be something that they're not. But at the same time, and Danny Law pointed this out while she was sitting in the courtroom, she noticed this wording. The Daily Beast here, Majors told Jabbari that, like King and Obama, he needed a, quote, great woman to support him. I'm a great man. I'm doing great things, not just for me. The woman that supports me needs to be a great woman. 2 nights ago, you did not do that, which took away from the plan. Now, How do you take something like that? Do you think that's abusive to say, I want something like this, the woman that I want to be with, I want them to be something like this? And maybe we've talked about marriage before, but you did something that is taking away from my plans for that marriage. Now, is that necessarily unequivocally a sign of abuse or control and or control? Would the flip side of that mean that he has to stay with her? What's the converse of that? If it's abusive to want to be with someone that's a certain way, which means you're trying to change somebody, the reconciliation for that, the flip side of that would mean that you shouldn't have the agency to want to find your partner, your person, the person that's right for you, that you should be accepting of the person you're currently with, even if they don't live up to those standards. And I always take issue to this kind of broad stroke of standards, desires, people's own wants and wishes for a relationship. And it's my personal belief you should be able to set them and you should be able to break up with somebody if they don't match those needs. Both parties should have that right. Let me know what you think about that. And that wraps it up for the incidents that she testified to earlier in the morning. And all that stuff happened before 12:49. So we did have Danny come back out and say, hey, there was a limiting instruction given where this stuff, or at least some of this stuff, is for context and shouldn't be considered as a predisposition towards certain behavior or something that could have led to the March 25th event. So it's unclear to me exactly how limiting that instruction is and what all it encompasses, because we do know that we had a photo and an audio recording come in, which now that should be an evidentiary exhibit that the jury can look at. I don't know if there's specific limiting instructions for those two things. But in any case, we heard those things in the opening statement, and it seems like we've already gotten to them. And my question personally is that it? Obviously, she could be testifying right now as I'm speaking this to something far more extreme beyond September 2022, what would have happened after this September 2022 incident. And then as another point of consideration, kind of in line of that idea of, is it controlling of me to want to be with someone that I think meets what I want in a relationship, right? If you have that on one side, but then in this case, we're having dueling allegations of they would use suicide threats when someone would try to leave. No, they would use suicide threats when someone would try to leave. We heard from Michael Perez's opening statements yesterday that part of the reason that Jabbari stayed was that there was this pattern and she felt coerced. She felt like she had no choice. That even though she was being deprived of affection towards the end of the relationship, she felt like she had to stay because, and now Jabbari's testifying to it, Majors allegedly threatened suicide after getting angry at her and made similar threats on more than one occasion. She said that she put his emotional needs first, which made her draw further into the relationship, pulling herself away from friends and her family. I felt really dependent on him, explaining how her confidence sank. I felt like every time I saw them, I was lying to them. Now, this is where conversation and takes from other people is really important to me because these feelings, these things, these dynamics can be real. It doesn't mean that they're signs of abuse. It doesn't mean that what was alleged to have occurred on any given day occurred because something else is. But she describes a lack of confidence and that could be dynamic, that could be the cause, or that could be the result of a relationship dynamic. So, for example, if you're feeling self-conscious and you're a white girl, and one of the biggest things that comes to your mind is the time that he told you he wants a partner like Coretta Scott King, to me, that could be just as much explained away as you read into that as more of a hostile interaction because you were already positioned, you were already sensitive to the idea of not being able to be good enough for him. Not because of him and his standards, but because of your own confidence, because of your own perception of what he desired in a partner, and so forth. I don't know how exactly to conceptualize what I'm speaking into words there, but I do feel that it's a thing. You also have her saying things like she felt dependent on him. In the course of the 1 year of testimony that we've looked at so far, from September 2021 to 2022, they're either sharing apartments or he or she's staying with him. That dependence doesn't just seem emotional, it also seems everyday security, having a roof over your head, having a place to go, to the point where you felt comfortable enough bringing your friend or friends over without him knowing about it, seemingly. I get that sometimes in relationships where jealousy and insecurity aren't issues, hey, I don't want to hang out. We all have a friend that gets in a relationship and then you don't see them until they break up with the person, right? But is that automatically the other partner's fault? Does that automatically make the other person controlling and abusive? So thinking back to that phrase earlier where she said, he's a big guy, you just want to step away from him. That's something you might want to nod along with. Yeah, I wouldn't want to fight him either. But just because it's agreeable in general doesn't mean that it's proof or evidence or indicative of a specific claim. So yeah, he's a big guy and I wouldn't want to fight him, but that doesn't mean he started to fight with somebody. And yeah, maybe Grace Jabbari felt like she put his emotional needs first, but that doesn't mean that he required her to. And I want those same principles that I'm using this as an example of. These are situations that happen in real relationships every day, where people feel like they bear the burden, but they're choosing to take on the burden of someone else's emotional weight, emotional baggage, or their insecurity is reframed as some type of, he told me I wasn't good enough. But it comes down to insecurity and the perception that he said he liked this, and I interpreted that to mean that I'm not that, so I am not good enough, and he's telling me I'm not good enough. And the idea of dependence and distancing yourself from friends, sometimes people do intentionally isolate their partners, and that's not okay. But other times we start to isolate because we're comfortable in a relationship. So it seems like we get more distant from our friends. But then when I start to feel down and doubtful about the relationship that I chose to focus so much time into, now I feel more magnetic. I feel more wishful that I was closer and with these other people that I used to spend a lot of time with. And now I feel lonely, but it doesn't mean that I got to that place of loneliness because someone necessarily abused me or controlled me or made me isolate myself. That's a lot. That's a long tangent. My general point is that it's not as black and white as she's either lying or not lying, because there can be very real feelings that she's describing, but the characterizations of the events, the nature of the relationship could all be subjective. And in fact, her characterization of the relationship, just like anyone's could have been different during the moment than it is now while she has to be on the stand testifying in this case. And we still get to see her be cross-examined on the facts of the case, her perception, her characterization of the relationship in general, her characterization of Jonathan Majors. She could even be specifically questioned on the things she's quoting Jonathan Majors as having said to her. Probably not his words on the audio, but he'll probably, if he's taking the stand, if he takes a stand, he'll be able to explain what he meant by that. And during cross-examination, the defense could ask her, if you characterize the audio that way, did you ever consider that it could be another way, that you were free to leave at any time if you didn't want to have that type of relationship? And maybe the reason your relationship started to decline, that it wasn't all lovey in the first few months, was because, general compatibility issues started to be realized. There's always so much to unpack with stuff like this, especially since we're going off of how it's being reported in words. We're not really seeing it be said. But all that stuff is just my opinion on what we just read through. And we have an afternoon update. So let's take a look at this. So at 2:38, they come back from lunch. And even though we left off with September 2022, we are jumping to March 24th. So the day leading into the 25th, where everything happened. So Grace first describes the morning. She said they had brunch, walked around, and it was really nice, really loving and sweet. A really nice day. When they left the apartment for Brooklyn that evening, his mood had changed. In the elevators, they went to the car. Jabbari said, he commented on my outfit, saying I had too many buttons undone and had to button them up. So she buttoned one up. Something had shifted. Eventually, Jabbari said, Majors revealed he was angry that she had spoken to one of his friends, Priya, not the attorney, I'm assuming, about his behavior. Then he allegedly threatened suicide again. After calming him down, the evening seemed to go okay again. Then came the return car ride from Brooklyn. So, pause there. So she apparently said something to one of his friends about his behavior. So I wonder if we're going to hear from this person. Or the allegations Jabbari lays out in her testimony echo prosecutors' openings, charging docs, etc. She says she saw a sketchy text with a song, took the phone, and that Majors allegedly roughed her up, twisting arm, striking head with an open hand, etc. Now, mind you, this could all be true. It could also be stuff that she pieced together after hearing what data was gathered from that phone, maybe whatever. I'm sure she saw something on the phone because she grabbed the phone in the moment. But as far as lining up the details of, this is when he grabbed my hand, and this is when he twisted my arm, and then this is when we got out of the car, and this is when we got back in the car, that might not just be pure witness recall. That could be stuff that was assisted or aided by things that she saw while thinking about what happened, or things she was told or heard while thinking about what happened. So this seems pretty straightforward, like they get chronological, they're not really telling too much story. She sticks to the details, bullet point, maybe. Um, Guessing. That's just my guess. So Victoria knows that she's fast forwarding a bit because there's a lot in a small amount of time. And the prosecution jumps to Jabbari's interactions with strangers, whom she met on the street after chasing Majors. They ask her why she went to the bar with them. Victoria says that the prosecution's trying to establish that she wasn't there to party, but because the strangers wanted to console her, and she didn't want to be at home alone. The prosecution also wanted to address any questions about how a person in pain could have chased after someone else and then gone out. She knew there was pain, but it didn't register. I've danced on pointed shoes my whole life, danced with a broken rib, I just didn't feel it, ... And then Jabbari's testimony ends for the day. She'll be back on the stand tomorrow, but this ended at 4:23 p.m. So about just under 2 hours of testimony to describe the 24th and what's being discussed so far. So what do you guys think? Because, before we came back from the lunch recess, I had commented in this video earlier saying, was that it? Are we going to see more? We're already at September 2022. And then we come back and we jump right into March 24th. So I don't know. It seems like we have some incidents that Jabbari thought of where, she had the recording of the one, she had a picture of another. It was supposed to be this pattern, but, we maybe see some mean or hurtful arguments, and we only see her characterizing his side of it. She hasn't been crossed yet. He hasn't testified. If he's going to choose to testify, he'll be able to explain any of those incidences that we've heard about from his perspective. And even though I think the prosecution is going to ask her some more questions tomorrow about, the hospital visit, why she went back to the house, the text messages that she sent, because it's clear they're trying to get ahead of what they know defense is going to cross-examine her on. I still think we're going to see cross-examine tomorrow morning, as soon as tomorrow morning, if not by tomorrow afternoon. I look forward to seeing how that goes or hearing how that goes. But other than that, what do you think? Because to me, it seems like they told us everything we're going to hear in opening, and Grace just went through the phone recording that Coretta Scott King, the March 25th, throwing an object. We went through all the days. So unless they're trying to introduce stuff through other witnesses, this initial idea that the prosecution plans to call 14 witnesses and they need 2 weeks, maybe since all these pretrial motions that happened on Friday and right before start yesterday, maybe they've whittled that down. Maybe that's been whittled down. Maybe they don't have 14 witnesses to call, or maybe the scope of what those 14 witnesses can testify to has been narrowed in scope, which means their testimony will be shorter in duration. I'm still pretty shocked at how short the digital evidence analyst's testimony was. And then now the main angle of the incident of the 25th seems to be, no, she was injured at that moment in time, but it didn't matter because she didn't feel it. What do you think? Have you guys ever broken a finger before? You may have seen me discuss previously that it's still a little slanted. It slants to the side still when I do a closed fist. It doesn't go flat. But when it first happened, I didn't feel it the second that it happened. But as soon as I looked at it, it hurt. And I made sure not to bump that thing around for a week. So I don't know. I guess I can't wait to hear from the doctor. I'm also thinking too how the jury foreperson is a registered nurse. She is a registered nurse, and what she might make of that, because I'm sure she's encountered that a lot. Anyway, what are your thoughts? Let me know. I'm sure there'll be more details that come out about, this 2 hours of testimony in the afternoon that was delivered today, but that was the gist of it. Pam's going live tonight. Make sure you check out the other people that are covering this case. And I'll be back tomorrow with an update. Especially, I'm looking forward to see the cross-examination for Grace Jabbari. So tune in then. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.